writer and broadcaster. I started working for the BBC in 1979, and astonishingly, I'm still getting some work from them. I think it was one of the organisers of the concert hall here, Sven Brown, who had heard of the work that I had done. Because I made radio documentaries for the BBC about the Scots in Poland, and because my book, The Scottish World, came out about 2.5 years ago, people were aware of that I had done some work about the Scots in Poland. And when he was putting together this season, he decided to ask me if I thought I could contribute something. So I ended up doing a straight lecture, illustrating it with extracts from my radio programs, but also did something where I did a similar thing, but with traditional music, because a lot of ballads and songs and tunes from Scottish traditional music went abroad with the Scots and came back as well. So I did a thing in the same room with 4 traditional musicians, where I told the stories and we illustrated that with the music. So that was a lovely event as well. The book, The Scottish World, it's about the Scottish diaspora. It's about places that I've visited. I've travelled a lot. I started travelling when I was 15. I hitchhiked to Europe when I was 15, and I've travelled ever since. And fortunately, because of my interest in Scottish influences in different parts of the world, several times I've convinced the BBC to pay me to do the research and to make the programmes. So I've got to wonderful places like Poznan and Gdansk to make these programmes, and Scandinavia and Portugal and Spain. A lot of Scots were in the wine trade, for example, so I've done programmes about wine and the Scottish influences in the port trade or the claret trade. I've done programmes about, a fascinating thing that's maybe interesting for Polish people is that a lot of Scots were involved in other people's liberation struggles. So you've got somebody like Admiral Cochrane, whom I describe in the book as a serial liberator involved in the liberation struggle in Chile, in Peru, in Brazil, in Greece. You've got you've got Lord Byron, George Gordon, who was one of the heroes of Greek liberation. You've got James Boswell involved in Corsican liberation. You've got the founder of Indian National Congress being Scottish. There seems to be a thing that the Scots had of being fascinated by other people's cultures and influencing other people's cultures. So the book is a mixture of my travels abroad and the effect of Scottish communities in different parts of the world, where a lot of people have no idea there was such an effect. I mean, the present migration of Polish people to Scotland is almost a mirror image of what the Scots were doing in the 17th century going to Poland, and I just find that fascinating. And I want to tell people that. Scottish history has not been well taught in Scottish schools, and a lot of the history that we are taught tends to be British history. The history that affects Scotland after the union with England, after 1707. So while there is knowledge of more recent migrations to Canada and to America, for example, there's less knowledge of the older migrations to France, to Scandinavia, to Poland. And I think that's one of the reasons why knowledge of that migration has gone underground. And there's also the fact that, as you heard from my talk, a lot of the names became Polonized. So Maclean became Makalienski, Weir became Wacher, Cochrane became Szochranek, etc. So even in Poland, perhaps a lot of these people wouldn't know the origins of their names. But then again, you still have some families where the name is preserved, like Tyler or Gordon, for example. I think they're two different things. After the Second World War, there was a demand for people to work on the land, and there was a demand for people to work in the forests. And the Poles who had been, many of them, in Britain because of the army being stationed here, were able to stay on and work in that capacity and were welcomed into the communities. I think with any immigration, I think it's the numbers that's important. I think the history of immigration is that if it's a small number of people coming in, they can be absorbed quite easily by the native population. If it's a huge number coming in, there tends to be a reaction and tends to be problems. So if there is any problem developing in the later migration, it's because of that fear. But I don't think it really has affected. I've never heard words against Polish immigration in recent times, because again, I think that the people tend to have gone to places like, say, the Highlands, to Inverness, where people from the south of Scotland don't want to go, or work in the tourist industry, for example, where again, some people don't want to work in the tourist industry. So, or a classic example is, for many years, the area north of Dundee is a fruit growing area where people pick raspberries. Well, that used to be done by the locals. It used to be a holiday for people from the industrial cities like Dundee and Glasgow. They no longer want to do that. So who has come in for the past 10, 20 years has been students from Eastern Europe, from Poland and Slovakia, etc., who've come in to do that job. So I'm aware that there's a bigger number coming in now, but I've never heard any animosity expressed by local people against that, although it may exist in pockets if the people feel that there's too many people coming in. I mean, a classic example of that, for example, in Glasgow, there's a part of Glasgow where there's been quite a large influx of Romani people, and there are problems. You know, and I think you always will get problems when a certain group comes in and concentrates in an area, and then the local people begin to feel threatened, or their jobs are under threat, or if there are social problems developing, then you can have reactions against that. I think so. I think people do enjoy learning about other countries and other societies, especially if there is a link with their own culture and society. And that's why I think it's so important that when Polish people are celebrating Polish culture, they always try and bring in a reference to Scottish culture and the links between Poland and Scotland. For example, the concerts that have been taking place about the Scotsese music, and there's a dance we have in Scotland called the Schottische, which is the German word for Scottish. You know, how does all that come about? Obviously because of links that go back many, many years. And I think things like that can join people together rather than separate them. I think it's a good idea to celebrate Scotland's links with other countries. I wish there was more devotion to the older links with the likes of Poland and France, rather than just the new Commonwealth links and the links with, and again, being very cynical about it, I mean, it's an advertising thing. It's the fact that people who have money to spend to come back to Scotland, Americans are the prime target because people think that they will have enough money to be able to spend and come back to Scotland. But I wish that it was extended, or my hope is that perhaps if it is a success, it will be extended and become a regular thing where different parts of the world where the Scots have had an influence are celebrated.